All right. It's about time. We'll go ahead and get started. And thank you all so much for being here. My name is Gwen Stembridge, and I am the Associate Director of Education and Partnerships at Nonprofit Vote. And you are here for Moving Mountains, issue advocacy for nonprofits in 2025 and beyond. We called this webinar Moving Mountains mostly because we want to remind you that any community change that is real happens over time. Often that is real and lasting happens over time with diligent efforts of many people. We don't expect anyone to literally move mountains, but much of the advocacy work that you're doing, the voter engagement work, all of that really builds up over time and is really important that we all work together and do our part to make our communities better. So I want to start out today by just walking through our agenda. So we've got our welcome here. If you all will, I invite you to put your name, your organization, any other information, where you're joining from, in the chat. So that's our welcome today. And we'll talk housekeeping here in a minute. You're going to get some highlights from Nonprofit Vote. Some of you may be very familiar with Nonprofit Vote. For some of you, Nonprofit Vote might be newer to you. So just want to make sure that we're getting everybody on the same page there. And then we'll hear just a little bit from our Executive Director, Brian Miller. So we're looking forward to that. And then the big cheese, the big reason that we are here today is to talk about this new tool that Nonprofit Vote is launching. It is a nonpartisan advocacy tool for nonprofits. So many of you all are doing voter engagement work, and you've come to us for our resources around voter engagement work. But we know that that work is year round. And so we want to make sure that we're equipping you with tools that you can also use year round, so that you're not just coming to people around election season, but you're really building those relationships and building that capacity year round. Then, as always, we'll have some time for audience Q&A. As a reminder, if you'll please put your questions in the Q&A section. There should be either at the bottom or the top of your screen, in that black bar, a Q&A little button. So there's the chat and there's the Q&A. Please use the Q&A for questions, and then the chat for general conversation. We like to separate those out just so that we can really keep the questions organized and make sure we answer them, as many as possible. And then we wrap up with a call to action, and we'll close from there. With our announcements and housekeeping here, just some friendly reminders that we will have the question and answer session. PowerPoint slides will be sent out to everyone who registered, whether or not they attended. And then closed captioning is available via Zoom. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to our Executive Director, Brian Miller.
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you all for joining this webinar and being a part of this important discussion. Wanted to give a little bit of an overview about who Nonprofit Vote is for those of you who are not familiar with this. Nonprofit Vote basically is a nationwide infrastructure support organization that works to equip our nation's nonprofits with nonpartisan tools and resources to help the communities you serve participate in voting and in democracy. And as you can see, part of this is really centered on the fact that we want to ensure that our democracy truly represents all the voices, including many historically marginalized or overlooked communities that have been left out of the democratic process, many of the same communities that are served by nonprofits. And we have a number of programs that we do to achieve this mission and this goal. The first of which is webinars just like this. We do trainings and resource support that we do trainings for nonprofits across the nation. Generally a few thousand folks come through one of our trainings each year, one of our webinars. We also have a wealth of online resources and toolkits, including the one that Gwen will be going over today. We have a lot of select partnerships with major national organizations and state organizations, from National Council of Nonprofits to Feeding America to a host of other organizations where we help them build out voter engagement programs for their respective constituencies and communities. We have a field program at least in major election years. We do run a field program in a few select states. And keeping it simple, we're also the managers of National Voter Registration Day, which is a huge civic holiday that happens every September. It's a collaborative effort, and we are honored and privileged to be basically the home base of that collaborative civic holiday. And we do also run a philanthropy initiative to basically inform philanthropy and get more philanthropy engaged in supporting this work. And again, all of this is around basically helping nonprofits and the nonprofit sector use its civic power and its civic influence. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. You can go to the next slide there, Gwen. And speaking of today, I'm sure top of mind of many folks right now is the wave of executive orders that have come out of the White House. And we just wanted to at least make a few comments related to that before we get into the webinar content. Obviously the start of that, the reality is we don't know, and very few people right now know what the impact a lot of these executive actions are going to be. There's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of talk, and there are real executive orders coming out of the White House, but we don't know which ones of those will be upheld by the courts, which will be struck down, or what portions of those executive orders will be approved, if any. What many folks have been tracking over the last few days, of course, is the freeze on federal grants, which we actually just got an email out about moments before this call. And within moments after that, the Trump administration rescinded the grants freeze. So as of now, that freeze on federal grants was just rescinded. However, I don't think we're out of the woods yet, because I think many would expect that they'll just come back with a new version of it that's a little better thought out. When that comes, we don't know, but we're certainly going to be keeping an eye on that. And we certainly encourage everyone on this call, if this is stuff that's important to you, plug into National Council of Nonprofits. They have a really good list of, they're tracking all these executive orders and which ones have an impact on the nonprofit sector and what the nonprofits can do about it. All that said, pretty much every one of these executive orders are going to be battled out in the courts. This is going to be, taken out through the court system, and ultimately the Supreme Court in many cases are going to have to rule on this, which is different than what we're talking about on today's webinar, because mostly what we're talking about on today's webinar is going to be advocacy as it relates to lobbying elected decision makers. That's things that Congress acts on, that your state legislature acts on, that city council and mayors act on. That's going to be the focus of today's webinar, but that doesn't mean there isn't a legitimate fights happening in the court systems. It's just the strategies that you use in court battles are going to be very different, because it involves signing on as a co-litigant. It's litigation is different. What we have here, why is it that nonprofits are good at advocacy? The reality is, or why should nonprofits do this? We know that active civic engagement, from voting to exercising voice at city council meetings, helps build healthier communities. We know that elected officials are more likely to respond to concerns of communities that advocate and promote voting. So when your nonprofit is out there doing voter registration, doing voter engagement work, and doing advocacy work in the community, you're going to get the attention of the elected officials, which means you're more likely to be able to advance your organization's mission and meet the needs of your community as a lead advocate. The relationships you have with the communities, and I'll just say that this is the same thing that makes us good at voter engagement, is because nonprofits have long-term roots in the communities that they serve. We have trust, we have long-held relationships, and we can lean into those same relationships when we're mobilizing our constituents, the communities we serve, to advocate or push for important changes that may be at the city council level, maybe at the state level. So whether your nonprofit works on housing rules and you're dealing with housing vouchers at the city council, whether you're advocating for more parks and green space or youth programs, or hunger, we hope this webinar is going to provide you some tips on how you can build out an effective advocacy and lobbying program to advance your organization's mission. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Gwen.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, as Brian was saying, this is so crucial. Nonprofits often we get focused on the day to day, on what's right in front of us, and it's hard to think about longer term things, right? When you're faced with someone who has some housing insecurity, or needs better food accessibility, or youth who have needs, all of those things, and it's really important, though, to think about that long term. Think about kind of what's up the river that is impacting what we're doing, and that's where this policy comes in, and that's where we want to really equip you all with the tools that you need to do advocacy to hopefully prevent some of those situations that you're then responding to in the moment. So we've created this tool. Nonprofit Vote has been around since 2005 or 6, for quite a while now, several decades doing this work. We really are focused on voting. And we know that voting is not just something that happens once a year, right? It is not something that you can just talk about one time during the year. If you're really going to build relationships with a community and really engage that community, it needs to be over time, so that folks don't think you're just coming and showing up and saying vote, once a year or once every 4 years or whatever that is. If we're really going to build a culture of civic engagement, then that needs to be over time. So we've got some tips for you here today, and these are really pulled together from expertise from our team that has both been doing voter engagement, but also community organizing, advocacy, policy, combined. The combined expertise is just many, many years in many different avenues and spaces. So the first part of this tool that we're going over today is 6 tips for nonpartisan nonprofit advocacy. And this really goes through the focus is not on what to advocate for. That is really up to your organization and what is going to be the best fit for you. But this is really about some tips about how to do it. Once you decide you want to, then how do you do it? The part 2 of this is an editable template for your organization to go through, really fill out the pieces of this that make the most sense, that connect with your nonprofit. So who are your elected leaders? What are the things that they have voted on before? How do you get in touch with them? What are the things that are going to motivate them or that are important to them? So we have heard from you all recently and really over the years about how helpful it is to have template documents. So we've created this. It's in a couple different formats. One is as a Google Doc, so that you can edit it yourself. You can also download it as a Word, as an Excel document, and also as a PDF if you want to print it and write it out by hand. So lots of options. We're hoping that this is really accessible for you all. And we also welcome your feedback as we're introducing this new tool. So as always with this, I want to be sure that you understand that I am not an attorney. We are not attorneys at Nonprofit Vote, and none of this is legal advice. This is all really just tips and ideas provided for informational purposes. And if you do have legal questions, please do talk with your board or an attorney that you work with. We also love our partnerships and really love our partnership with Alliance for Justice. And they're a great resource. They are attorneys, and you can talk with them and kind of get that more specific advice. So the first thing I want to just distinguish here is advocacy and lobbying. And this is something, as my experience working for many years in a direct service nonprofits and then moving to the advocacy world, that I really had to learn. And so want to just make this distinguish this as we're going forward. So advocacy is really about raising awareness. It's about talking about issues that are important. For instance, if you're working on affordable housing for your city, and that is something that your nonprofit is really cares about, is really crucial to your mission, then that is a thing you can raise all the awareness about that you want. You know, if that's going to take some kind of legislation to do, you can talk about the need for it. If you're talking about a specific piece of legislation, though, that gets into the lobbying category. And there's a difference also between direct lobbying and indirect lobbying. So direct lobbying would be, for example, if you're talking to a council member, a city council member, and you say, Council Member Jackson, we urge you to vote for bill number 555 to provide more funding for affordable housing in our community. That is, you know, you individually, that direct lobbying saying, hey, we want you, elected official, to vote for this thing. Indirect lobbying would be something like you sending out an email, putting out a phone call, or any other kind of call to action for your community or your audience to say, neighbors of this and this county, please call or email Councilmember Jackson. Here is their phone number. And also, please show up for this council meeting on Tuesday to ask him to vote yes on Bill 555 to provide more affordable housing for our county. So those distinctions are really important to remember, that advocacy is talking about the issue. Lobbying is specifically asking a legislator or asking your community to ask a legislator to change that certain policy, vote yes or no on it. So really wanted to just start out with that distinction because it's important and will be relevant as we go. So the first tip that we have on this toolkit is to identify which officials are making the decisions related to your organization's priorities. So really to take a look at what are your organization's priorities and figure out, are there actually things that can be changed through policy in the ways that you want to. So when you're looking at changes that need to be made, you may be really excited to go to the city about that. But that issue might really be a federal funding issue instead. So really do that research, figure out what those issues are, and then which elected officials are going to be the best fit to do your advocacy with, right? Who has that power? Some tips, along with this is that you want to check those government websites. You can always look for a .gov at the end of those. That's really handy. And you'll want to just look at those, the county or city or whatever official government website. You want to start there. You want to think about what region do they cover? Are they at the national, state, or local level? You want to think about what branch of government are they in, legislative, judicial, executive. That will all impact the type of power that they have. Lobbying judges is not really a thing that is going to be very fruitful, right? They are supposed to be really unbiased and really make those decisions based on their expertise. But legislative members that we elect should be listening to their constituents in that way. So those are some examples. You also want to think about, is this position full-time or part-time? A lot of local city councils are part-time. Some are paid, some may not be paid depending on where you are. And so you want to think about that also in relation to how much time you may expect for them to respond to things, or just things like that. How much time do they have to dedicate to their elected position? You also want to think about, are they part of a larger body? Are they a member of a committee that will consider certain things before passing it on to the larger body? Think about all of those pieces. Do they have influence over budgets? Budgets can also make a big difference, and those usually happen once a year or once every couple of years. So you want to kind of catch that timing as well as you're paying attention. And then what is the timeline for their term, right? Are they up for re-election soon? That might be something that is motivating for an elected member. The next piece you want to do is just learn who those elected leaders are and how to contact them. So you're checking those government websites. Some questions you might want to ask is, has this person been elected to this position before? Maybe they were a city council member before and now they have run for mayor. So they have a little bit of that experience. They know kind of a little bit how the politics work in that particular area. You also want to think about, what is their professional experience? Are they an attorney? Are they a doctor? Are they a teacher? And what does that bring to their role? What experience does that bring? What connections might that bring? You also want to think about if they're on certain nonprofit boards, if they have certain causes that are really important to them, that you can maybe reference or talk about as you're having conversations with them. What are the causes that they care about and why? And see if you can also then relate that to the work that they're doing. I worked several years ago, was working on a city council campaign for some non-discrimination protections, and had a council member who was on the fence about it, was trying to figure out if he wanted to support or not. He also had a daughter who has special needs. And was very aware of how she had been made fun of by kids and bullied. And we were able to just talk with that council member about how also there are lots of kids who get bullied because of who they are. And so we were able to kind of make that connection with him. And he understood that, no one should be discriminated against because of who they are. And so that connection, even though he did not have particular experience with what we were talking about, he could understand that, and that helped to make that connection. You want to also think about, have they voted on the issues that your organization cares about? Have they voted on these things before? You can see, most of the time, you can see voting records. If they're not available online for some cities, you can always do a records request, a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request. For meeting notes or things like that. That should be public information that you should have access to. You also want to look at any of those areas of government that might have appointed leaders. Often you will have maybe a mayor who then appoints the chief of police and the law director and any other positions like that, but those positions might also be elected. It kind of depends on the area that you're in. You want to find their email, phone number, a physical office address, and then a website or some kind of web portal if they have one. Join their email newsletter. Many of these elected officials do have an email newsletter. Many of them have a presence on social media that you can follow and interact with them there. They may answer those communications directly, or they may have an administrative staff member who is answering those you kind of work through. All things to be aware of when you're thinking about how to contact those leaders. The next thing you want to do is really, once you've done research in that kind of research phase, you want to think about preparing your organization to do advocacy in some way and to build those relationships. You want to talk with your board, with your executive leadership about the lobbying policies for your organization. If you don't have them, you might want to think about creating some to provide guidance for staff who might be carrying out the work, or volunteers or community members that you're working with in that. Think about that policymakers, their influence. Is there a topic or issue in which your nonprofit has expertise? Do you do a survey of the community every year that tells a story and really gives a picture of the needs of your community? Can you bring that research and that expertise to the table when you're talking with those elected officials so that they have a bigger picture, a better picture of their constituency, the people that they're serving? You can bring that expertise to the table. Also, think about your board, your staff, your volunteers. Some of them may have a connection with that elected official, especially if you're thinking about small towns. I live in a smaller city, and it is just, it's a small town sometimes. And you never know who, went to high school with who, or who, played baseball together, or they sang in a choir together. You just never know what connections you may have that you can then utilize to move forward what you're trying to advocate for, or to just get more information that'll help inform the whole strategy. You'll also want to make sure that you have a plan for documenting and tracking any of the activities that you're doing. There's a thing called the 501H election, which is a piece that nonprofits can apply for. Basically, if you're thinking of doing some lobbying on a regular basis, I would urge you to consider just looking into that, see if that might be a fit for your organization. It does mean that you'll need to do a little bit more documentation, but it might be worth it for you. So just do some research there. That's through the IRS website. And we also, I think, can share that link in the chat. I know there's lots of good conversation happening in the chat here. So we will get to questions soon. I'm excited for that. The other thing you'll want to just review is lobbyist registration requirements. Sometimes there are state houses or state capitals that do require you to register as a lobbyist. Sometimes it depends on the amount of time you plan on spending there. There are some cities that require this as well, or counties. So you want to just do a little research about that. Reach out ahead of time so that your organization is also prepared for that. I know often if you're registering as a lobbyist at a state house, it might be about $100 to register someone to lobby there. So you just want to keep those things in mind as you're doing that work. And the next piece here is about establishing an organizational relationship with your elected official. Anyone who has been in any kind of leadership position knows that often if you're getting just a barrage of one-time questions or requests from someone that you've never met, that you don't have relationship with, it could be pretty overwhelming. So you want to be sure that you are focusing on building relationship over time. You're unlikely to get what you're advocating for in the moment if you are just asking that one time, kind of a cold call. You're much more likely to get movement on the issue you're advocating for if you are building that relationship over time. You're getting to know that legislator. You are, again, providing your expertise as a nonprofit professional. You're providing that expertise to them. They're seeking your advice or working with you on something. So you want to become known as that trusted entity in the community. That's really important to those leaders. One of the things that you can do as part of building that relationship is setting up an educational meeting with those leaders. Again, sharing your expertise, helping them understand your mission, why you exist. You may be serving a part of the population that they are just not connected to and aren't aware of the issues that are facing the arts community or youth in a particular neighborhood or something like that you are the expert on. So make sure that you value that expertise and show up with that and share that with them. You can also invite them to opt into your organization's communications. One organization that I worked with, we made a whole strategy of giving holiday cards to legislators, of writing holiday cards, making sure that we were staying in touch with them. And around the holidays, that can be a nice time to do it. They may get a lot of things around the holidays, but invite them to something. If there's a festival that happens within your community, invite them to that. Invite them to see the work that your organization is doing and to see and meet members of your community. And then also newsletters and things like that so that they're getting information on a regular basis. This is just from personal experience. Being polite and persistent in communications has gone a long way. Often, like I said, elected leaders are getting a lot of messages, but that doesn't mean that they have an excuse not to respond. It is really responsible for them to respond at some point, but also if you don't get an immediate response to your first outreach, don't give up at that point. You can reach out again, or you can reach out in a different way. If you sent an email before, maybe try a phone call. If you've already done an email and a phone call, maybe show up to their office. Think about just different ways to begin to build that relationship. The next piece here is how do you participate then in that legislative process? You want to think about where those legislative meetings are held. I have been to all kinds of city council meetings in all kinds of different buildings. One, we spent a lot of time in the firehouse, and because that's where they were building a new city hall in the city where we were working, and they were meeting in the basement of the firehouse. Sometimes those meetings are going to be in person. Sometimes they're going to be virtual. Sometimes there may be multiple options for in-person and or virtual. Think about, are they recorded? Are they live streamed somewhere? And then you want to think about, how do you sign up to comment on that legislation? Sometimes I have had to sign up as much as a week in advance in order to get on the agenda to be able to speak at public comment. In other spaces, in other cities I've worked with, you really just raise your hand in the moment if you want to speak during public comment, and everything in between. Often there is a sign up process because they do want to document, who is coming, who is speaking, what are the topics or the bills or the ordinances that they're speaking on. But do think about that. Also, make sure you ask if there is a time limit for that public comment. Some folks are really strict about that. There is a timer. But others, it's a little bit more loose and depends on the timing of the meeting that night. But really do your research ahead of time so that you know what that process is at that particular government body, because it really is going to vary from state to state, city to city, wherever you are. Also, just remember that sometimes there will be delays, or there may be changes of items on the agenda. Sometimes those are just, you didn't have enough time at that meeting, and so things are getting pushed to the next meeting. There was more public comment than they anticipated. They had, a recognition of this Boy Scout troop this week, and it just took longer than they anticipated. That may be the reality of the process. It could also be an intentional political move, right? If they're saying, oh, we don't have time, we have to hold this the day after Christmas. Oh no. That may be a delay tactic or something like that. So you want to pay attention to those as well. And then the last piece here is really about evaluating and celebrating your work. I would start with the celebration part, actually, because when you're doing this type of advocacy work, it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of investment. And often those wins don't come as frequently as you want them to. So it's really important, if you get a win, please do celebrate that. But also, if you don't, know that you made an impact, that you had the voices heard of communities. Know that you have made a difference just in that, even if whatever you were advocating for or hoping for didn't pass or didn't turn out in the way that you wanted. It's really important to just recognize that and see those opportunities as wins as much as you can in order to build that momentum as you are continuing your cause. The other thing you'll want to do is just make sure that you're documenting and evaluating your work, noting, okay, we sent out that action alert a week before the meeting. Maybe we need to send it out 2 weeks before, or, we had these types of conversations. Maybe we need to prep our volunteers a little bit better to have these different types of conversations. Make sure that you're learning from those experiences and applying those learnings as you go, so you can be more and more effective each year. So those are our 6 tips that we have for you. And again, these are in the tool that I believe Travis is sharing in the chat. I wanted to also just touch on a couple of additional resources that we have for you. Again, we love our partnerships. We love our partnerships with Alliance for Justice. Ballotpedia also has some wonderful resources. Again, all of these are nonpartisan resources as well, so you can use those in that way. And then the IRS H election form, again, all these will go in there. All of these will go in the chat as well. So, and these are all also at the bottom of the tool. The the interactive piece, the part two of this tool, is this elected leader tracker. And I have used so many spreadsheets just like this in my time, and have been trained by many organizers before me. And there's different names for these types of things. Sometimes I will call it elected leader bingo, because you are finding, the best, the most information that you can, and trying to really fill in what you've got. But this is what it looks like. Here on the left-hand side, you've got the position. You may not want to reach out to every single one of these folks, but you do want to think about the different levels of government that do exist, so that you can find out who is going to be the best fit for what you're advocating for. Again, looking at the federal level, you're going to be talking US Senator, your congressional districts, your member there. You might want to advocate toward the governor or a state senator, state representative. You may have a county executive or a commission that you can advocate to. It might be a mayor, a city council member, a village, town council member, or it may be school board members that you're looking to advocate toward and to lobby. So you want to make sure you have their contact information down. I have at times added those phone numbers to my own phone number, to my own phone, to my contacts, so that if something is happening and I want to get in touch with them, I want to call my representative and make sure that my voice is heard, then I have that number handy, right? So I have that saved in my phone. I can make that phone call. We've got the example here with legislator Joe Jenkins. And then often when you're talking about higher level federal congressional offices or senators, they may have a staff scheduler. So you might want to put the information for that staff scheduler there as well, because that's who you really want. If you're trying to get a meeting with them, that's who you're going to want to talk to. The legislator email is they're going to be focused on other things. But you really want to get the information of that scheduler so that you can schedule a time to meet with them. You want to think about when they were last elected, when their next election is. You can look up all of those terms and everything. I love Ballotpedia as a resource there. Then you want to think about what their responsibilities are. Do they vote to confirm presidential appointments, as an example? What are the types of things that they are able to vote on? And then just a notes section, you might want to think about, okay, are they a former teacher? What are some things that they voted on before? All of those things, elected positions they've held in the past. This is where you can kind of keep a lot of those notes. This may not be enough space for you, so we have that Google Doc and that Excel doc, so that you can make those boxes as big as you want. You can really customize this to your needs. You can add additional columns if you want to. You can add and change the rows. You can really customize this, which is what I find really handy. So now we're going to take some time. I want to also just check in with Brian. Is there anything that you want to add from your expertise here as well?
Sure. Thank you, Gwen. Yes, I wanted to just share a couple of things. Actually, I'm going to go back to one of the legalities. But as Gwen says, many of us have a lot of, in addition to doing voter engagement work, if you go back and look at the work we've done, I spent, years doing tax advocacy, organizing, coalition building, and stuff like that. But so a lot of these tools that Gwen is going over are right out of the book of how to do the work well. It really addresses the mechanics of it, and hopefully that's what this toolkit does is helps you address the mechanics of doing a good advocacy and lobbying effort, and the best practices. I did want to circle back to the legalities quickly, and just a reminder that this isn't intended to be a legal webinar. This is simply addressing the mechanics and the how-tos. And we generally defer to the Alliance for Justice when it gets the legalities of it. And I did want to say one thing, and we have these references in the toolkit, and it was also referenced earlier. You may have seen things on the side about a 501H election and all this kind of stuff. And just to do a real brief synopsis of that, by default, all nonprofits, by default, nonprofits are under the significant part test. That means you can lobby public officials for or against legislation, so long as it does not represent a significant part of your programs and activities. There are some court rulings, which AFJ will reference, which says that can include roughly 5% of your activities or budgetary expenditures. But there is some vagueness that people are uncomfortable with the significant part test, which is why a lot of groups move over to what's called the 51H, which is an expenditure test. Especially if you're doing a lot, if you're not doing much lobbying, you're doing a little one-off, you're probably fine under the significant part test. If lobbying is going to be, excuse me, a significant part of your activity, then then you may want to look at the 51H election. With that, then the IRS looks at how much of your budget was spent on lobbying, and you can spend up to 20% of your budget on lobbying, which is a lot for most nonprofits. And then there's some distinction between how much of that could be the direct or grassroots lobbying that Gwen referenced earlier. So again, if lobbying is going to be a big part of your program work, you should look into that and definitely check out the Alliance for Justice resources that are linked in the back of that toolkit. And I know Monica from the Alliance for Justice, Monica Graham from the Alliance for Justice, also dropped another useful link in the chat window as well, in addition to the links that we have in the back of the toolkit. So hopefully that's helpful. Oh, one other bonus, and this is something which I don't think we included here, but we've referenced here before. Back to what's going on in the White House. There's a lot of things that we don't have a lot of control over. Again, litigation, that's going to be in the courts. There's very limited input we can have in that process. But cabinet position nominees are basically considered lobbying. So if you're advocating for or against the cabinet position lobbying, that's basically like lobbying for or against a piece of legislation. So from Congress on down to the city council and mayoral races, some of these advocacy tools and lobbying rules, rather, hopefully will be very helpful for everyone. And again, Gwen, thank you. And thank you, Monica, for dropping another resource in there. Yeah, and if there's, yeah, I think we're going to the questions, Gwen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for adding that in. And so glad that Monica is here. We so appreciate your partnership and are excited that you're here as well, and happy to always amplify the resources that you all provide. So yeah, I think we're going to start with some of the questions that are in the Q&A box. As a reminder, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. That is going to ensure that we are able to answer them in an organized way. If they're in the chat, it's going to make it really difficult. And so I just want to be sure that you're sharing them in the Q&A. Great. I'm going to take a look at a couple of these. Yeah, so someone asked, do we have any partnerships with the League of Women Voters? Yes, we are wonderful partners with the League. Actually, one of our webinars last year featured right at the end of the year. It was about ballots and education, around ballot education. And we had the League of Women Voters as a partner on there. So yes, we're definitely fans and partners, and we love what they're doing to offer nonpartisan information on voting as well. Great. This is another great question. So another person asked, how do you recommend approaching doing advocacy work internally or pushing to do more advocacy within an organization that is hesitant to be seen as political or lobbying, especially in today's political climate? How do we get our internal nonprofit higher-ups to touch advocacy when they seem afraid of it? Brian, I saw you come off mute. I think you're just eager to answer this question. So I'm happy to pass that to you.
Sure. I would tell people the same thing that I would tell you if you're moving into the voter engagement space, is connected to your mission. I think the more you can have these at the end, the kind of internal conversations within the organization that makes a clear line between achieving the mission of the organization and advocacy or lobbying or voter engagement, the more likely you're going to do it well, have organizational buy-in that's going to last. It's not going to be a one-off thing you do for one cycle and never again. And so I think it's really important to have those internal conversations connected to the mission so that people see if we want to advance. If you're into affordable housing in a local community, city councils play a big role in determining how much affordable housing is available, what the thresholds are for affordable housing and new developments. This is stuff you absolutely can and should engage in if you want to expand the share of affordable housing. Same thing with food, whatever your mission is, there's probably a direct line between what your mission is and some important policy. That's first and foremost. I think beyond that, getting people over any discomfort they have about the lobbying. Can we do this? And the reality is obviously, yes, you can. And so you can lobby. It's, again, and you can take positions for or against legislation for city council resolutions. And obviously there's all those AFJ resources that support that, which you can go to for additional info.
Yeah, I will just echo all of that and say that those connections exist. And I think this is part of what gets me really excited about this work is that I've worked in nonprofits for over a decade, and often we run into this issue that the work that we're doing is wonderful and is helping the community, but then you kind of hit a roadblock sometimes because there's a policy or a law that needs to be changed in order to, open up some possibilities or break down some barriers for members of the community or for ways for nonprofits to operate. So those connections exist, and it's really this is a great opportunity to break down those barriers and help folks understand the connections there. Great. There are a couple of questions here about two particular bills. And Brian, I might lean on you a little bit for a couple of these. Folks are asking, how can we stop the HR 9495, which is probably going to get a new bill name in this new Congress. And that is the bill that we have actually a whole blog about it. It was in some spaces called the Nonprofit Killer Bill, really threatening the status of nonprofits. And then there's another bill here, the SAVE Act, which was HR 8281. And so wanted to just bring those up. I know this webinar is really particularly about how to advocate in those ways, but these bills do impact nonprofits. And so, yeah, I want to pass that again to you, Brian, if you can just give us a little bit of an overview and catch us up.
Well, I think first and foremost, both of those, unlike the executive orders, which are going to be battled out in the court, these are things that are going to be battled out in Congress, which means nonprofits do have the ability to weigh in and lobby for or against these bills. And now, as advice for how to do that, and as Gwen says, the first one that we referenced was the one that it's the Stop Terrorist Act or Stop Terrorist Financing Act, but it basically there's a legitimate question about the lack of due process that bill has, which gives authority to sort of revoke 501c3 status. I'm not going to get into the details of that. The second one cited, and here's the SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship in all federal elections. Both of these are bills that we're certainly watching and keeping a close eye on. The best advice I would have for folks on how to do it is really to plug into the coalitions that are leading this work. Because the reality is most nonprofits, if you're in the middle of, Illinois somewhere and you've got a food pantry housing clinic, unless you've got a DC staff, you're not necessarily going to know who the swing votes are, where it is, when it's moving in front of what committee. So that's where really plugging into committees into coalitions is so important for anything at the national level, especially, but usually at the state level too, to be a part of a larger coalition. So I would definitely say to plug into whatever coalitions you know of that are working on these issues, and take the lead from them whenever possible, especially if you're a smaller nonprofit. If this is coming to a vote next week, do we have folks in these districts that can call their House of Representatives? And then if your organization has, like we at Nonprofit Vote, we don't have a DC lobbyist. We don't have people walking the halls at DC. We do have a vast network. So, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting out calls to alert. We're going to get out calls to action to say, hey, across the country, here's who we can do. We can contact this senator. We can contact this representative to oppose these pieces of legislation. And that's essentially the mechanics. So look at what you can bring to the table. What you can bring to the table is a vast network. Then how can you use that vast network to push back against bad legislation or support good legislation? And then again, bring what resources you have to that larger coalition and find your place within that coalition to move those mountains. Because to move the mountains, it's not going to be one small group. It's going to be a bunch of different groups working together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking that. And I really, coalitions and working together is the answer to so much of this, right? Build those relationships with other nonprofits that are doing similar work to you, and also who are doing work within your region. There's some other questions in here that are really good questions. One about are nonprofits able to sue, to block certain orders or bills? Again, I would just answer that one by saying, look to those coalitions. National Council of Nonprofits is also a wonderful partner that we work very closely with. They've been involved a lot and have a lot of resources I think we'll share in the chat here. Yeah, I think that's about all the time that we have for those questions. As a reminder to folks, this is being recorded and will be sent out after the in the next few days here. Want to wrap up our time here with some action items. I come to this work through being a community organizer. And so I really can't leave a meeting of people without having some action steps to give you. So the first piece, selfishly here, I'll say, if you have not yet filled out the Nonprofit Vote Partner Survey, please do so. We are always looking to improve the work that we are doing and really incorporate impact from from you all and feedback. So would love for you to do that. That'll be shared in the chat. And then, like I said, our partners over at National Council of Nonprofits are collecting stories of the ways that these most recent executive orders are impacting nonprofit organizations, which they might use in litigation or in related communication. So your nonprofit might have a story that's really important that could be really impactful in this process. So there's a link, we'll put that in the chat again, to share your story as a nonprofit there. You can always, as always, stay in touch with us. Take the Nonprofit Vote Pledge, which is just saying that you will do some kind of voter engagement in the next year. There are plenty of opportunities. I know it's not a presidential year, but every year is a year for voting. So you can always be taking steps toward voter engagement. So we encourage you to do that. And then, as always, there are lots of ways you can follow the work that we're doing. We are on Facebook, on Twitter and X, on YouTube, on Instagram, and now most recently on Blue Sky. You can also always find us on our website, find us at info@nonprofitvote.org. If you are interested in any kind of customized trainings or materials, things like that, also we are available to do that. Many of our tools are free and available on our resource library on our website. But if you'd like some more kind of customized hands-on webinars or things like that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we're super grateful for everyone who supports this work financially and in a whole host of other ways, so that we can continue to get you all the information that you need about nonpartisan voting to build a better and stronger democracy for us all. So thank you all so much. Please do stay tuned for our next webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.